Meanwhile, a record number of illegal migrants and deadly drugs pouring through the southern border. We just got back from the border. I went there for the fourth time to meet with the leading AGs. Ken Paxton from Texas putting together a summit of Republican attorneys general to brief them on the border issues. Oklahoma Senator James Lankford also visiting the border last week. He visited the facility in Brownsville, Texas, where a large number of single adult male migrants were processed by ICE and then flown across the country. Joining me right now is the man himself, Oklahoma Senator James Lankford is here. He is a member of the Homeland Security Committee, along with Governmental Affairs and Finance Committees. Also joining the conversation all morning long this morning, Lee Carter and Nancy Tengler. Senator, thanks very much for joining me and joining this conversation this morning. I want to get your take on what you learned at the border during your trip. After all of those secret flights were exposed, and we have on camera many of these migrants being flown to various cities across the country. What did you see?
Yeah, I saw exactly the same thing there. Obviously, adult males that the administration continues to say they're turning around. They're not turning around. They're actually flying into the interior of the country. I saw what they're calling closing the gaps in the wall, where there are areas where they just halted construction a year ago. Now they're actually building this tiny little fence area in between the actual fence area and saying that's going to be closing the gaps. And then they've also set up what they call the Remain in Mexico policy, which federal courts have required the Biden administration to do. They've set up courtrooms, they've set up processing areas, but there are no people in them at this point. They're getting very few people through the process. They're basically letting everyone through and having a handful of individuals that are actually being processed for Remain in Mexico, so they can tell the courts they're doing it, but they're not actually doing it. But it's costing taxpayers millions of dollars for the setup for their pretend process.
Well, you mentioned a lot of really important items there. I think I was at the same spot that you were at, looking at the new wall, which was funded by Texas, and all of the gaps when you compare the new wall to where the other old wall was, and all of those construction materials on the floor, $100 million in construction materials that are going to waste. But what you just said in terms of the Remain in Mexico program, I want to drill down on, because, Senator, look, we know that the courts ruled that they have to reinstitute Remain in Mexico. Right. But so far, what have we seen? 200 people, 267 people, total of 400 people being sent back to Mexico. How is it possible you've got 2 million people over the last year apprehended and only a couple of hundred people have been sent back to Mexico? Why is it okay for this administration to blow off court rulings and create this lawlessness despite being told otherwise?
So the court's going to have to step back in and just say, no, I meant it when I said it. You can't just do this pretend process. You talked about the 2 million last year, but just in the time that Remain in Mexico has been set up, they've had about 178,000 people illegally cross our border, and about 200 people of that have actually gone through that process. So clearly this is just a pretend setup process that's really not trying to be able to actually enforce the law and to actually follow the court order on it. They've set up so many exceptions in the system. If you come as a family unit, you don't go through it. If you have any medical condition of any type, then you don't go through it. If you're LGBTQ, then you don't go through it. They set up all these different aspects of it and said, these are all the exceptions of all the people who don't have to go through it. And so it takes it to such a small number that would actually qualify that literally when I was in Brownsville, they had 3 people that they're actually going through the process on it of the thousands of people that are actually coming through the process.
Well, I mean, how are they getting away with this? It's a total lie. They've been told to reinstate Remain in Mexico, and they're not doing it. I mean, you just mentioned the single unaccompanied men that they're flying around the country. It used to be that these people would lie and make believe they were a family unit. They were renting kids to make believe that they were their kids. They don't even have to lie anymore, right? They're just being sent wherever they want, and taxpayers are paying for this.
That is still being done. As far as the rent-a-kid portion that you talked about before, that's still being done. I would tell you the reason that this has not been challenged is no one's actually exposed this. This is when I was getting down there to be able to take a specific look at this, because I've seen the numbers. I want to actually see the site and see what it looks like. And it's an enormous facility that's set up. It's literally millions and millions of dollars to be able to set up the facility that they set up. But they're just not running people through it. They're saying, well, there may be more people that go through it in the future. But with the system that they put in place, there's no way. It's designed to not have people people go through it. So this scenario, the court's going to have to step back in and say, no, I meant it. We've got to actually do this. There is a way to enforce the southern border. President Trump did this. The Remain in Mexico policy does work, and we need to be able to put leverage to do it.
All right, let me move on to policy. As the U.S. national debt tops $30 trillion for the first time, Democrats are still pushing through more spending. They want pieces of the Build Back Better legislation to move forward. Even as Senator Joe Manchin said it's dead, do you think they're going to be able to push through their $555 billion spending plans that they want to get through on the climate? And also, what about Joe Biden's nominations? One of the key priorities for Sarah Bloom Raskin is the climate priority, and she's going to be in the hot seat facing the Senate hearing tomorrow, questioned over her radical views on climate change and private banking. But let's face it, she's made climate a priority for the banks. Is she going to get through? And what about Lisa Cook, giving senators a chance to ask her questions as well on reparations and police reform, Senator?
Yeah, all these come forward. This is the challenge of them having enough votes to be able to push it through. If they can keep, as we say at home, all the frogs in the wheelbarrow. If they can keep everybody on board on their side, they do have the votes to be able to get it through. We're going to continue to expose this and be able to set in front of our colleagues. Are you really going to allow someone to be able to step in that's going to deal with banking, that's going to deal with all these issues on policing, that's going to radically change the direction of our country because of the preferences of a few radical progressives that are in your ranks that are the loudest individuals? Are you really going to allow this type of people to happen? Because it shifts the priority of our economy from growing our economy, growing jobs, getting inflation down, to saying, what are we going to do on all these different social issues and climate change and everything else, and how we're going to attack every single company and banking based on their climate change preferences on this, rather than actually dealing with the economic preferences. There's no problem with dealing with the most basic elements of we can deal with climate, we can deal with environment, we can deal with the economy, but this radical progressive shift on it really will damage our economy, as we've already seen with $30 trillion in debt now. By the way, $2 trillion of that added just in the last 2 months. $2 trillion in new debt in the last 2 months. This is this enormous climb in this curve to be able to have more and more debt to the nation. We've got to have an intentional focus on it. And thankfully, Joe Manchin is one of those Democrats that's stepping up and saying, why are we talking about spending even more when we're spent $2 trillion in new debt in 2 months?
All right, we will leave it there. By the way, do you think they're going to get through? Did you see any pushback from any Democrat senators on those two nominations?
No, I have not yet, but we're still not done. Obviously, there's a lot of work to still be done to be able to get the word out.
Senator, thank you. Good to see you. Senator James Lankford joining us in D.C. this morning. We've got the ADP numbers on the other side of this break. Stay with us.